She lit the candle with that oddly practiced grace, the flame catching just as she leaned back into the couch cushions. The scent was lavender, the one she always said calmed her nerves. She looked at me without really seeing me, eyes soft but distant, and said it like a contract. "I just want this to be a no-drama zone." I nodded, slow. "Yeah, me too." And I meant it, at least the version of me sitting on that couch did. She pulled her knees up under a blanket, phone in one hand, thumb scrolling with unconscious rhythm. I watched the glow flicker across her face while the candle did its best to make this room feel warmer than it was. We had barely spoken during dinner. She said she had a long day at work, and I didn't push. I never really did. That was the quiet understanding we developed, or rather, the quiet I had accepted. But lately, her quiet came edged with something sharper. Tense shoulders, sudden retreats into silence, quick, hollow smiles when I'd ask how her day went. The couch beneath me was familiar. The woman beside me, less so. That no-drama zone phrase stuck in my mind like a needle pressed gently against skin. Not painful. Just not right. It sounded like a boundary drawn in advance of something. I said nothing, just watched her scroll and scroll. She wasn't laughing at anything. No expressions, no occasional sideways glances to include me. She could have been alone in that moment, and the room wouldn't have changed. 10 minutes passed, 20. She eventually set the phone down, adjusted the candle so it sat perfectly centered on the coffee table. Another habit, like symmetry, gave her a sense of control, then stood. "I'm going to shower." I nodded again. She walked away without waiting for a reply. When the water turned on down the hall, I stayed on the couch and stared at that candle. Wax pooling slowly, flame steady. A performance of calm. And I realized something. That no drama line? It wasn't an observation. It was a request. Maybe even a warning. Something was under the surface. And that surface was starting to ripple. The shift was quiet at first. Not dramatic, just oddly choreographed. She started locking her phone. Not with a password, which she'd always had, but with facial recognition and that quick, practiced tilt of the screen away from view. I noticed it once when we were sitting at the kitchen island. Her reflex as I passed behind her was too quick, too precise, like muscle memory. The week after, she started going on evening walks again. Alone. Said she needed the air, needed to unwind. After work. I nodded. Told her to take her time. But the walks had a new rhythm. She used to go out in old sneakers and a hoodie. Now she left the house with eyeliner set just right, hair pulled into those deliberate not trying too hard waves. Twice she sprayed perfume before heading out. Once I caught her smiling into her reflection as she tied her scarf, that tight, satisfied kind of smile I hadn't seen in months. I said nothing. But a crack had formed, and I could feel it every time she stepped out the door. It was 3 nights later when she snapped. I asked her when dinner might be ready, not as a demand, just a casual check-in. She was slicing vegetables at the counter, earbuds in. She pulled one out slowly, turned her head just enough to look at me, and said without a blink, "I'm not your housewife. You always need something." Her tone wasn't angry. It was cold, flat, like the words had been stored up, and she was just waiting for the cue to release them. I didn't respond. I just stepped back, nodded slightly, and walked out of the kitchen. But a wall went up inside me right then, clean, high, and solid. We'd had disagreements before, sure, but not like this, not with that undercurrent of disdain. Later that night, she set our plates on the table like nothing had happened. Talked about her coworker's dog. Laughed at a meme she showed me on her phone, still tilted away, still careful. And through it all, I mirrored the calm, played my part. But my mind was no longer sitting across from hers. Something had broken behind her eyes. Or maybe it had been gone for longer than I'd realized. That wall inside me? I wasn't leaning on it. I was already planning what I might see if I stepped around it. I didn't confront her. That would have been emotional. And she'd already labeled emotions as drama. I wasn't going to give her a chance to play the victim of tension she was quietly feeding. So I went quiet, still, watchful. She marked 2 work dinners in our shared calendar that week. I noticed the way she announced them. Too rehearsed, too cheerful. "Just so you know, I'll be out late Tuesday. And again Friday. Work dinners. No detail, no invitation to ask questions. Just a flat, convenient boundary. That Friday, after she left in a new blouse and heels I hadn't seen before, too elegant for work, not quite formal enough for corporate, I opened the insurance app connected to her car. It's one of those services that logs driving data for lower premiums. She'd once insisted we both use it. Smarter driving, she'd said. I smiled at the irony. The logs told a story. No restaurant addresses. No office towers. Just 2 recent trips to the same midtown hotel. Not a fancy one, just discreet enough to blend into the city noise. I took screenshots of the trip history, time-stamped and archived. Then I remembered the old browser sync we never disabled. Her phone and our shared laptop used to sync bookmarks, saved logins, browsing history, a feature meant for convenience when we planned vacations or reorder from our favorite restaurants. I opened it, clicked through recent logins. One messaging platform. Logged in twice a night, once on Monday, once on Thursday. Not from our house. The location data showed nearby cell towers, different from home or her office. One name stood out. A man's. Unfamiliar. But his name kept surfacing in searches. Once linked to a restaurant review. Another tied to a conference website, one she attended last fall. I copied the data. Saved screenshots. Didn't touch anything else. When she returned that night, smelling like citrus and something sharper, she smiled as if the evening had been exhausting but productive. Long one, she said, kicking off her shoes and stretching like the day had really worn her down. I said, hope it went well. She nodded and poured herself a glass of wine. We watched a show she half followed. She laughed at the right beats. But I was no longer watching the screen. I was watching her. Watching the space between what she said and what her eyes didn't. I had no proof yet. Nothing she couldn't explain away. But suspicion was no longer a feeling. It was a strategy forming, quiet, intentional. And it had just begun. By the next week, silence had become my second skin. I wasn't cold, just measured. Every smile was polite. Every question casually timed. If she noticed, she didn't show it. Or maybe she was just grateful the surface hadn't cracked. But the deeper I went, the more the pattern revealed itself. She mentioned a spa day. Self-care, she said, waving off the cost as overdue indulgence. Normally, she would have shared photos, raved about the massage, or complained about the cucumber water. This time, nothing. No details. Just a vague. It was good. I checked the billing through our joint account. The payment came from a third-party processor, typical for bundled packages. But the billing address linked back to an online retailer, one I recognized from an old birthday gift order I'd placed. It wasn't just spa services. There was a men's cologne in the same transaction. A mid-tier brand, not fancy enough to be a gift for me, and not something I wore. The timestamp lined up with her spa visit. She had bought the scent along with her pampering, or more likely, for whoever was waiting nearby. 2 days later, I visited the hotel from her car's trip log. I parked down the block, waited. Her car was there, parked neatly in the lot, hours before she was supposed to be out with clients. I didn't see him. Didn't need to. I didn't walk in. I didn't create a scene. I took a photo of her car, double-checked the license plate in case she accused me of mistaking someone else's vehicle, and left. That night, she came home early, hair damp from a shower. Said the dinner ran short. Everyone just kind of bailed early. Her voice was light, even breezy. She poured tea, complained about traffic, walked barefoot into the living room and curled into her corner of the couch with a blanket and a book she never seemed to read more than 10 pages of. Then she looked at me, soft, practiced. I'm just tired. Hope you don't mind if I crash early. Of course, I said. She padded off to bed, and I stayed up in silence, not angry, not hurt, just staring at the ceiling, teeth clenched, breath even. Because now I knew. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to see that this wasn't a lapse. It was a routine. Practiced, hidden, maybe even rehearsed. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how easy she made it look. Saturday night came with artificial warmth. She had invited friends over. Her friends, mostly. I offered to grill, played host, set the lights out on the patio. The laughter came easily for them, echoing off the back wall like nothing had ever cracked behind it. She floated through the evening like a woman perfectly at ease, touching arms when she talked, laughing louder than usual, refilling glasses before anyone asked. She wore the same top she'd worn on our anniversary dinner 2 years ago, except back then, it had meant something. Now it felt like costume. When I carried a tray of food out, one of her friends, the loud one, always making declarations as if life were a sitcom, raised a glass and grinned at us. "You two are so chill. Like zero drama ever." Everyone laughed. It wasn't a joke, not really. It was a compliment dressed in assumption. She smiled, flicked her hair off her shoulder, and nodded like she was being humble about it. "Exactly. That's our thing. No drama zone." I didn't smile. I poured myself another inch of wine and nearly choked on it. My jaw tightened, not from the taste, from the lie. The brazen ease with which she said it, knowing what she was doing, knowing where she'd been less than 72 hours ago. But I played my role. Set down the glass, passed the platter, laughed when it was expected, nodded on cue. Later that night, after everyone left and the lights were turned off, we climbed into bed. She turned away from me almost instantly, pulling the blanket high, one leg tucked up like always. Her breathing evened out within minutes. But sleep didn't come for me. I stared at the back of her head, the shape of her silhouette against the glow of the hallway light, and I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. We hadn't shared anything that night. Not a glance of private understanding, not an inside joke, not a single look that meant, "You and me." The room was full of people earlier, but the space between us had been vast, and for the first time, I understood what emotional vacancy really felt like. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't icy silence. It was this. Two people in the same bed, breathing the same air, with miles of cold between them, and only one of them aware of it. Patterns don't lie. People do. By then, I was already committed to the long game. I stopped looking for isolated mistakes and started mapping connections. Where she went, who she messaged, what aligned with what. Her coworker, the man from the messaging platform, had a bland LinkedIn profile, forgettable except for the department match. Same floor. Shared project last quarter. I found a group photo from their team retreat. She wasn't standing next to him, but the way their heads leaned slightly toward each other gave it away. Subtle. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for betrayal in body language. But that wasn't the worst of it. The browser sync, still quietly feeding me breadcrumbs, brought up a private message thread between her and her sister. Not long, just enough to freeze my hand on the trackpad. Her sister had written, "You've earned your freedom. Just keep it smooth till your next move." And my wife replied, "I know. I'm just staying chill. No reason to rush the mess." No mention of me. No confusion. Just the casual language of someone managing her exit like a project. Smooth. Choreographed. Quiet. It was the line that hit me hardest. No reason to rush the mess. I wasn't living in a marriage anymore. I was living in her transition plan. Everything made sense after that. The affectionate moments? Maintenance. The smiles? Coverage. The sudden interest in hosting dinner parties and resetting boundaries? Optics. She wasn't trying to save anything. She was softening the landing. The people closest to her, her sister, and at least one of the friends from dinner, knew, or at least played along. I remembered the way one of them had hugged her a second too long at the door. The way they locked eyes like a signal had passed between them. I wasn't dealing with a secret. I was dealing with a small, complicit ecosystem. So I started drawing a different kind of boundary. Not emotional. Legal. I copied the messages. Saved the threads. Documented dates, names, locations. The lies weren't isolated. They were organized. And I wasn't going to be the last one to see it. I didn't tell anyone. Not friends. Not family. Not even the one coworker I trusted like a brother. This wasn't the kind of pain you vent. It was the kind you prepare for, with precision. First stop was a quiet, out-of-town law office I found through a referral loop that didn't trace back to our city. The attorney was calm, direct. Listened more than he spoke. When I laid out the trip logs, the synced messages, the billing discrepancies, he just nodded slowly and said, "You're doing the right thing by documenting, not detonating." That stuck with me. I followed every recommendation he gave. Separated the liquid assets into a protected account, fully legal, fully trackable. Not a hiding move, but a shielding one. I wasn't about to be blindsided if she decided to pivot from deception to defense. I added home audio recorders in shared spaces, carefully, legally. No private areas, no secrets, just strategy. Every frosty breakfast, every dodged conversation, every deflection now captured in crystal clarity. She never noticed. Or maybe she did and decided it wasn't worth addressing. She probably thought I was still lost in routine, still clinging to the life we once had. But I had already accepted that the life I'd believed in was over. The woman in our kitchen? She wasn't coming back, and I wasn't waiting. Each evening I reviewed footage, documented tone, body language, her distance, the strange phone calls she took behind closed doors, her voice low and sweet, then suddenly distant if I entered the room. One night, I watched a recording where she leaned against the counter and whispered, "No, it's fine. He doesn't ask anything. It's just quiet now." Quiet, that word again. "No drama zone," she'd said. But silence wasn't peace anymore. It was the sound of retreat. Her retreat, from honesty, from commitment, from any version of love that required actual presence. She thought silence protected her. She didn't realize I'd turned it into a weapon. And soon, I'd put that quiet to use. Not in rage. In resolution. It happened on a Tuesday morning. No special symbolism, just the next available moment when everything I needed was organized, duplicated, and ready. She came into the kitchen wearing that same worn robe, coffee already half poured, scrolling through her notifications. It could have been any other day. That was the point. I placed a folder on the table between us. Neutral color. No label. Just thick enough to be unmistakably intentional. She looked at it, brow creasing. "What's that?" I didn't sit. Just stood by the counter, arms folded, calm. Trip logs, credit records, hotel timestamps, photos, messages. A summary of the last few months. She didn't reach for it, just stared at the folder like it might open itself and shout. Her face went still, not guilty, not afraid, just calculating. "You were spying on me?" Her voice was sharp, but quieter than usual. She was already on the back foot. "No," I said. "I was listening to the silence." She finally opened the folder, flipped through one page. 2. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. "Remember?" I continued, nodding toward the candle on the counter she hadn't lit in weeks. "You said this house was a no-drama zone." I agreed. "So this," I gestured to the folder, "isn't drama. It's documentation." Her mask slipped further. The faint edge of her voice cracked through. "You really went through my stuff." "I went through our stuff," I corrected, my voice still level. "Joint account. Synced devices. Shared calendar. You weren't hiding from a stranger. You were hiding from someone who knew how to look." Silence pressed down between us. She didn't reach for defense. Not really. She knew. She just didn't expect to be seen this clearly. I picked up my keys and turned toward the door. She said nothing, but I could feel the questions crawling behind her eyes. "What happens now? What will you do with this?" I opened the door, then paused, glancing back once. "No drama, right?" I said quietly. And before she could find a response that sounded innocent enough to throw, I closed the door behind me. Not slamming it, just ending the scene. It took less than 48 hours for everything she'd built in the shadows to come down in daylight. Her coworker, the man she'd been quietly meeting, was married. I didn't need to tell his wife. I didn't even need to hint. HR received the screenshots I'd gathered, time-stamped and connected to office travel receipts. I left my name out, quiet, surgical. By the end of the week, he was out. Not just from the project, from the company. Her sister, the one who told her to keep it smooth, lasted 7 days as a safety net. Then she politely asked her to make other arrangements. "Too much tension in the house," was the excuse I heard secondhand. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Our mutual friends, the couples we'd had over for wine nights, the ones who used to laugh at our no drama dynamic, went quiet. One unfollowed her on social media. Another ghosted entirely. No explanation, just absence. The kind that says, "We saw it. We're not playing along anymore." She tried to reach out twice. The first message was careful. Neutral tone. "I know you're hurt, but this got bigger than it needed to." I didn't respond. The second was longer, less measured. It started with, "You blindsided me," and ended with, "I still believe we had something real." I replied once. Just once. "I left the peace you asked for. I won't disturb it now." There was nothing else to say. I wasn't interested in dismantling her further. She was doing that herself, through silence, through consequences, through the weight of her own decisions echoing in places where applause used to be. And for the first time in months, my quiet wasn't a cover for pain. It was peace. Not the kind she preached. The kind she never gave. I thought I had seen the full picture. I thought the worst of it was over. Then a mutual friend, someone I hadn't expected to hear from, reached out quietly. A short message. Just a subject line. You should see this. Attached were screenshots, forwarded emails. Not recent. Dated months back. She had been messaging not just the coworker, but two others. One lived overseas. Long video calls, messages about what life might look like if things were different. The other? Local. Met through a networking event she swore was just boring panels and free coffee. Same patterns, same phrases. Things are just too quiet at home. I feel like I'm fading. I'm not being seen. Each thread was a performance of distance, an audition for escape. And all the while, she had been asking me for space to reconnect with herself, telling me she needed clarity, that she was going through something internal, that it wasn't about anyone else. I sent the material to my attorney that same day. He responded in under an hour, recommending we file a motion requesting full documentation of communications relevant to marital conduct. Not out of vengeance, out of necessity. Her mask hadn't cracked, it had shattered. A week later, her number lit up my phone. Late evening. I didn't answer. The voicemail that followed was breathless, panicked. You don't understand. It wasn't like that. I was trying to figure things out. She broke mid-sentence. A long pause. Then a choked apology. The kind that comes only when everything else has collapsed. I didn't reply. I'd already responded. With evidence, with silence, and with exit. She hadn't built a life. She'd built a carousel. And now it was spinning with no one left to watch. I wasn't on it anymore. And I never would be again. She got what she claimed she wanted. Quiet. But not the curated kind she once lit candles for. The kind that smells like lavender and fake harmony. No, the silence was heavier. Real. The sound of rooms that no longer echo with footsteps because no one visits anymore. She moved out weeks after the legal motions were filed. Not by force, by timing. Her things disappeared in waves. First the clothes, then the shoes, then the framed prints she insisted gave the living room soul. What was left behind was emptier than I expected. She rented a room from an acquaintance, not a friend, those had thinned out. One of her last text messages, the only one not steeped in excuse, read, "It's temporary. Just until I figure out what's next." What was next never came. She faded from the places we used to frequent. Her name slipped from conversations. People stopped asking where she was. They knew, or didn't care to ask anymore. Whatever story she told, it had too many versions, too many contradictions. I heard through someone, a distant connection, that her sister moved overseas. No goodbye post. Just gone. Meanwhile, I settled into a smaller place. One bedroom. No shared calendars. No echoes. There's a stillness here I didn't realize I needed. No more background tension. No more pretending. I make my own coffee in the mornings without watching anyone scroll across the counter. I leave the TV off more nights than I turn it on. The walls don't feel empty. They feel honest. I still think about her sometimes. Not with longing. Just with clarity. She built her world on quiet evasion. I rebuilt mine on quiet truth. The silence I live in now isn't a retreat. It's recovery. And it doesn't need candles to feel real.